Sunday brunches at Mom's house had a rhythm of their own. Waffles, bacon, orange juice, and smiles that didn't quite reach the eyes. Miranda's kids ran circles around the dining table, screeching with delight. Her husband, always in cargo shorts, always with a half laugh, flipped channels on the living room TV, ignoring the chaos. My plate sat half empty while I listened to my mother praise Miranda for something trivial like homemade banana bread. "Miranda always knows how to bring the family together," Mom said, touching her arm with a smile that never landed on me. I used to wonder if I was just imagining it. That constant, quiet divide between us. Maybe it was just my insecurity, until I got older and started seeing it clearer. The special looks, the extra servings, the way she'd lean in toward Miranda's kids like they were the only ones that mattered. I didn't resent the kids. I just didn't feel seen. I took a sip of my coffee and smiled at something I didn't find funny. The sound of laughter filled the room, but none of it was mine. That day, there was a moment, so small it could have slipped past me, when Mom said, "Well, everything's being handled. Financially, things are in place for the future." I paused mid-bite. "What do you mean?" She waved her hand. "Oh, nothing. Just that Miranda and the kids will be taken care of." I smiled again, nodded like it didn't sting, but inside, I filed that sentence away like a puzzle piece from a box I hadn't opened yet. Later, as we cleared dishes, me alone in the kitchen, while Miranda scrolled on her phone, Mom handed me a wet plate and said, almost to herself, "It's good knowing Miranda's future is secure. I've done what I had to do." I nearly dropped the plate, but I nodded. Because that's what I've always done. Nod, smile, and swallow. I grew up knowing hard work was what kept you afloat. Miranda floated through life. I paddled upstream. When we were kids, she spilled nail polish on Mom's new rug. Mom laughed. I cracked a window by accident. Mom didn't talk to me for a week, and yet here we were, adults now, and still, that same current. Driving home, I stared out the windshield like the road owed me answers. What was she talking about? What had she done? I shook it off. I always did. But the next week, I stopped by to drop off groceries. Mom was in the back room, so I let myself in. There on the kitchen counter was a thick white envelope, edge torn slightly open. On the front, elegant black script read, "Banque Privée de Genève." French? She wasn't planning a trip. There hadn't been a word about Europe in years. I touched the envelope with one finger, just for a moment, before I heard her footsteps. I pulled back. She entered, and for a second, just 1 second, her eyes darted to the envelope, then to me. I asked casually, "Mail from Europe?" She forced a smile. "Oh, just junk." "Some old paperwork I meant to toss." She stuffed it into a drawer. That drawer hadn't held junk in years. That night, lying in bed, I looked it up. Banque Privée de Genève. Private Swiss bank. Not the kind that sends out junk mail. Not the kind that forgets whose name is on the account. The name wasn't mine, but the signature on the envelope was hers. My mother's. I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing her voice. "It's good knowing Miranda's future is secure." What did that mean? What did she do? It wasn't about money anymore. It was about trust, and the quiet crack that had always run through the foundation of our family. 3 days later, I walked into a quiet law office downtown. Clean, cold. Mr. Hall had handled our family's legal matters since I was 15. I told him I needed to update my own will. That was the cover. But when he asked why now, I leaned in. Anything I should know about recent changes, say to my mother's estate? He hesitated, just for a second. Yeah, and that was all it took. "I shouldn't be saying this," he muttered, looking over his glasses. "But yes, some things have been restructured." "Swiss bank?" I said, barely above a whisper. He didn't answer, but he didn't deny it. I sat back. So that was it. No warning, no discussion, no explanation. My mother had shifted almost everything, retirement, stocks, the house, even Dad's old investments, into accounts tied to Miranda and her family. All through a private channel, no legal notification, no word to me. She chose Miranda, Again. I didn't argue, didn't cry. I thanked him, stood up, and shook his hand. As I walked out into the October sun, I felt something settle. This wasn't about inheritance. This was about erasure. And if they thought I'd stay quiet, they didn't know me at all. The envelope didn't lie, and neither will I. Not anymore. I stepped out of my car just as dusk spilled across Houston's suburban street. I held onto a facade, a casual stopover with groceries in hand, as I walked to my mother's front door. Inside, the hum of cable TV, the scent of microwaved leftovers, and her easy laugh tricked any visitor into thinking nothing was off. But that evening, my footsteps were deliberate. I gauged light through the kitchen window before entering. I noticed Mark's wrist, that new silver watch reflecting lamplight. He didn't wear it before. Almost immediately, Mom and Miranda looked up and shared a flicker of something invisible. My heart thumped. Not fear, suspicion. Trust is like glass. Once cracked, you see every fracture. I nodded and joined in the chatter like a guest, not an outsider. I made small talk, asked about her week, about expenses, casually mentioned a friend's recent trip to Europe. Mom answered with practiced deflection. "Oh, just things I've handled." Miranda smiled and said, "You know, some of us are just better at saving." The tone was light, but mean. I sipped tea, nodded, let it pass. My jaw ached for response. Inside, I counted edges. Every phrase here was a move on a chessboard. She couldn't see me smile outward, but inward. I tightened my grip on that envelope memory, stored it like ammunition. When Mom suggested we all move to the living room for an update, I agreed. I sat between Miranda and Mark, feeling the pivot of glances. The meeting was casual. Mom asked about bills, mortgage, how things were going with the kids. But Miranda slipped in. "We're planning a pretty big overseas investment soon. It's a great opportunity, something Mom helped us see." Her voice was light as lace. I froze. The statement hung between us. Mother coughed, glanced at me, but offered no correction. I asked calmly, "Is that tied to your trust fund or Mom's assets?" Miranda laughed it off. Mom cleared her throat. "It's just something we're exploring." I nodded, lips sealed. But I noted every flick, every crease. They thought I'd stay quiet. Flashback. Years ago in my finance job, I caught a coworker fudging numbers, quietly collected evidence, exposed him without raising my voice. That memory steadied me. In here, in the living room, I was doing the same. They underestimated silence, and I would use it to dismantle their lies. Afterwards, I thanked them and excused myself. No drama. I left them unsettled. As I drove, I opened my voice memo. Miranda investing overseas, ties to family funds. I recorded every word like evidence. Then I dialed an old contact in securities law and asked for names of international accounts. When I parked outside my apartment, I whispered, "The axe forgets. The tree remembers." I unlocked my door, chest heavy but calm. I didn't need their answers tonight. I already had my first clue. I woke before dawn. The quiet of my apartment was a kind of cover, the only time I could dig through the stacks of papers without interruptions. Coffee on my left, highlighters on my right. Old family records, bank letters, and handwritten notes sprawled across my desk like a map of a crime scene. I lined up dates from memory against what my mother had told me. Transfers that supposedly never happened. Amendments that were just talk. I could see the cracks forming like spider webs across glass. I'd learned long ago in a paralegal's office that paper doesn't lie. People do. That voice still whispered as I flipped another envelope. My fingers didn't tremble. They moved like a surgeon's. This wasn't snooping anymore. It was evidence gathering. I picked up my phone and scrolled to the name of an old college friend at the county clerk's office. "I need a favor," I said. My voice was calm, but my pulse raced. She hesitated, then whispered, "Come by before lunch. I'll leave it under your name." That was all I needed. The downtown archive was a world away from the warm smell of my kitchen. Fluorescent lights hummed. Microfilm machines clicked like insects. The air smelled of old paper and static. A young clerk slid a manila folder across the counter without looking at me. I walked to a corner table, sat down, and opened it. The first page was an amendment dated 6 months ago. My sister's name, Sela, written as sole heir. Below it, my signature. Perfect, practiced, black ink. But not mine. My mother had always told me to sign in blue. Always. I stared until the words blurred. It wasn't just betrayal. It was premeditated theft. They had used my name to pull it off. I folded the page neatly, fed coins into the copier, and made 2 copies without a sound. My hand ached from holding the paper too tightly. On the way out, I passed a security guard. He nodded. I nodded back. No one would know what I'd just seen. Back home, my living room had turned into a war room. The forged amendment sat beside old journals and letters. I opened my laptop, searching signature forgery detection and reading every guide I could find. Stroke analysis, ink density, paper fibers. My eyes moved faster than my breathing. A memory hit me hard. My mother at the kitchen table, waving a check, telling me, "Always sign in blue ink. It shows it's real." I reached for one of my old notebooks, wrote my name in blue, then in black, compared it to the amendment. The differences screamed at me. I whispered to no one. They counted on me never looking, but I'm done being blind. My jaw tightened as I laid out everything like a chessboard. Every move now mattered. I had no intention of confronting them yet. That would come later. This was about proof. I scanned the forged amendment and attached it to an email for Lorelei Rory Nash, my friend who sometimes worked with a forensic consultant. "Tell me I'm not crazy. I need an expert to back this up," I wrote. Before hitting send, I printed 2 copies and slid one into my fireproof safe. The click of the lock sounded louder than it should. For the first time that day, I let myself cry. But it wasn't grief. It was release, a pressure valve opening. "This was never about money," I said into the empty room. "It's about being erased." I remembered a quote from a book I'd once read, and the words left my lips like a promise. "The cruelest lies are told in silence." By the time the email left my outbox, my heart had steadied. The apartment felt still again. But this time, the stillness belonged to me, not them. The apartment was quiet that afternoon, a stillness that pressed against my skin. My coffee had gone cold on the desk. I opened my laptop just to check emails, thinking maybe Rory had written back already. Instead, I saw a new message in bold. "Confidential update regarding estate matters. My mother's lawyer, Corinne Valen." My thumb hovered over the trackpad, but I clicked anyway. The words on the screen were polite, measured, and sharp as a blade. "If you make any public claim regarding estate matters, you risk exposing family discord and reputational harm." My heart thumped once, hard. This wasn't housekeeping. This was a warning. I looked up at the bookshelf. Family photos lined the top. My parents, Sela, me as a child smiling at a camera I can't remember. I stared until my face blurred into the frame. The stillness inside me began to churn. The email went on, each line like a nail hammered into wood. "If you speak publicly, you risk forfeiting your share entirely." My fingers hovered above the keys, then dropped. I thought of my mother's voice from years ago. "Be a good girl. Don't make waves." Silence had always been the currency she rewarded. I typed a reply, sharp, angry, but stopped, deleted it. I sat back in the chair, the glow of the screen painting my face. A quote floated into my head, something I'd read when I was young and still believed in fairness. "Silence is the last resource of cowards." I refused to be that. Instead of firing back, I opened a blank email and wrote a neutral response. "Received your message. Please clarify." I sent it. My jaw stayed clenched. My pulse slowed. Restraint wasn't surrender. It was strategy. By evening, I had arranged to meet Corinne in a cafe near the courthouse. I told her it was about my own estate planning. A harmless pretense. I arrived 20 minutes early, ordered tea, and chose a seat with my back to the wall. The place smelled of coffee and lemon cleaner. Lawyers in suits murmured over laptops. Corinne walked in at 5:12, hair perfect, smile professional but thin. She sat across from me, sliding her briefcase under the table. "You wanted to discuss something?" she asked. I leaned forward, calm but direct. Why did you send me an email threatening me with forfeiture? Her eyes flickered. We advise what's best for the family. I tilted my head. Best for which family? My mother's? My sister's? Or the one I thought we had? Her lips tightened. She repeated the warning about irreparable harm if I acted carelessly. I sipped my tea. Harm to whom? I asked quietly. She didn't answer. I let the silence stretch until it became heavy. Then I smiled, stood, and said, "Thank you for your time." When I got back to my apartment, my phone buzzed. A text from Rory. I checked the amendment. The lawyer's email came just hours after it was filed. I sat down hard on the couch, staring at the message. It wasn't just a threat. It was confirmation. The timing was too precise. My fingers scrolled back to Corinne's email. Rereading it now, I saw the seams. What had looked like caution was an admission. "They're daring me to prove them wrong," I murmured. "Fine." I opened a secure note and typed a quick instruction to Rory to digitize and back up the amendment and the email chain. My hands were steady again. If they wanted silence, they'd have to force it. The room was dark except for the phone's glow. Outside, traffic hummed. Inside, I felt the shape of resolve settle in my chest like steel. At midnight, Rory sent 2 new files, one that would change everything. Rain streaked down my apartment windows like thin gray wires. Midnight's glow from the city smeared across the glass. I sat on the edge of my bed with the 2 files Rory had sent still unopened on my laptop. My pulse drummed in my ears. I clicked the first file, a notarized visitor log. My name, clear as day, dated in March. Same week, Seela had told me she was running errands here in town. My throat went dry. I opened the second file, a grainy, bank-issued video still. A woman with my posture walked into the notary office. Same coat, same bag. But when she turned her head, it wasn't me. I zoomed in, eyes narrowing. On the man next to her, a glint on his wrist. The same expensive watch her husband had flaunted at my mother's house. They didn't even care to hide it well, I murmured. The rain hit harder outside. Inside, my hands were steady, but my stomach felt hollow. My chest ached as memory dragged me back 2 years. Father's funeral. Cold wind, folding chairs, and silence broken by polite condolences. I had stood at the entrance greeting everyone, making sure the coffee stayed warm, arranging flowers. Behind me, my mother and Seela stood together, heads bent, whispering. Their black coats like twin shadows. I'd overheard fragments. Just us now, easier to manage. I'd brushed it off, telling myself grief made people say strange things. But I remembered how my mother's hand squeezed Seela's too tightly, a grip that looked more like a signal than comfort. Even now, the image burned behind my eyes. Present-day me whispered over the sound of rain. Turns out I wasn't paranoid. I was just early. I pushed up from the bed and walked to the bathroom. The mirror's surface was fogged from the shower I'd forgotten to drain. I wiped it with my palm until my own face stared back. Tired eyes, clenched jaw. "How much did you miss?" I asked the reflection. "How long did they plan this?" My inner dialogue spiraled, flashing images from childhood, every chore I did, every quiet thank you from my mother, every time Seela was excused for breaking the rules. My hand curled into a fist. I didn't hit the mirror. I punched the wall just beside it. A hairline crack appeared in the tile, white dust on my knuckles. "Families break you in the same places they once kissed," I whispered. The woman in the glass no longer looked like a helper. She looked like a challenger. The sound of the rain steadied me. I went back to the living room and started pulling everything, documents, journals, old bills, stacking them on the coffee table. My entire life in paper. I grabbed my phone and called Rory. She answered on the second ring, her voice low. "You sure you want to go this route?" she asked. "If we're doing this," I said, "we go legal, full audit. I'm done playing diplomat." Rory hesitated. "This will get ugly." "It already is," I replied. When I opened a browser window and started researching trust violations, identity misuse, quiet litigation, I reached out to a contact at the Swiss bank using an encrypted app, an off-record inquiry. Before shutting down my laptop, I dialed my mother's number and let it go to voicemail. My voice was calm. "If you won't talk to me now, the next voice you'll hear will be a judge's." I ended the call. Thunder cracked outside. I sat back, breathing slow, feeling a strange calm. I wasn't the quiet one anymore. I was building my case piece by piece. Tomorrow would come, and with it, the first move on my side of the board. The next morning, a message was waiting, not from my mother, but from the bank. I woke to the harsh ping of an email notification, heart stiff before my fingers moved. The subject line read, "Your mother's assets never left her account. Ulrich Baumann." My hands trembled as I opened it, every sentence framed like proof. They insisted everything was intact, no money transferred. My breath caught. I thought back to when Ulrich had argued that Swiss bank records were definitive, immutable. I typed a reply with fingers coated in tension. Questions, demands for clarity, but sent it before refining a second pass. The tone was raw. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the blank wall. If he's lying, I thought, I'll have to expose every suppressed truth. No turning back. I resolved I would no longer let authority hide betrayal behind formalities. By mid-morning, I scheduled a secure video call with Ulrich through an encrypted line. I laid out evidence, dates, copies of the forged amendment, bank logs from Rory. His face appeared on screen, cool, controlled. He reiterated, "Your mother's assets remain in her account. We find no record of outgoing transfers." My pulse surged. I countered steadily. "Then explain why your internal log shows a withdrawal linked to my name." Under pressure, Ulrich faltered. He admitted a partial ledger existed, but called it a correction entry, a bookkeeping adjustment. I pressed harder. A correction that was never disclosed to me or my attorney. How is that legit? His face darkened. He said nothing. The silence shook me, but I held my posture, refusing to recoil. Late afternoon, Rory texted. "I found the recording. It's from the same day as the amendment." My phone buzzed while I sat at my desk, nerves raw. I opened the audio file. The voice speaking, my mother's voice. "Sign it. It's for the family, not her." But pitch shifted. She sounded coached, plastic. My throat closed. The betrayal stung. They didn't just use papers. They distorted voice. I typed a chat message to Ulrich. "You're hiding voices now. You manipulated her words." He froze. The screen held his silence. My chest swelled. The walls between lying and truth crumbled. I felt the shift. This was no longer a quiet war. It was full-out battle. That evening, I drafted a public statement, unreleased, but potent. I will no longer let silence steal my identity. I messaged Rory to activate press contacts and legal filings. I locked away every piece of evidence, printed backup copies, and deposited them with someone I trust. Later, I called my mother. Voicemail. "You gave me no choice. Tomorrow, everyone will hear this truth." My voice was steady, measured. I hung up, sitting in darkness. Fear rippled in my veins, but also power. The quiet woman I once was had evaporated. A reckoning loomed. At dawn, the walls of our family would begin to tremble. The courthouse smelled of polish and paper, and my shoes clicked on the marble floor as if announcing my nerves. I walked past rows of plaques etched with names of judges long gone. Everyone I passed seemed to know why I was there. Eyes followed, quiet but heavy. Before the double doors, I stopped and adjusted my grip on the briefcase that felt heavier than its contents. Royce's voice from his last email hissed in my memory. "Bring nothing you can't prove." My pulse slowed as I whispered to myself, "I've brought everything I need." That was not a pep talk. It was a warning to them, and to me. I stepped into the courtroom, shoulders squared. The air was cold, deliberate. I sat at the counsel table, eyes fixed on the bench, the only thing steady in a room designed to rattle me. Today would not be about theatrics. It would be about steel. When our case was called, my heart surged, but my hands stayed steady. I rose and began to lay out the evidence piece by piece. Bank logs, forged signatures, internal memos. Each document had its own scar. My voice carried flat and direct. Across from me, Royce's lawyer, neat and rehearsed, stood to object. "These exhibits are unauthenticated," he said, a rehearsed line meant to sound like revelation. The judge listened, expression unreadable, then ruled. Several of my documents were inadmissible on procedural grounds. The sound of the gavel cracked the air and cracked something in me. For a breath, I felt the floor tilt, but my face stayed still. Inside, a voice cut through. "They're not beating the truth. They're beating the rules." The defeat burned, public and raw, but it also marked the line I wouldn't cross back over. I bent my head as if making notes, but I was writing only one sentence. Next strike, airtight. Outside the courtroom, my phone rang sharp. Sela's voice burst through, shaking. "Mom collapsed at home. She's in the ER." My throat closed. The courthouse doors blurred, then the street, then the hospital. Ambulance lights flashed against wet pavement, and I ran through them like a ghost chasing itself. Inside, the antiseptic smell wrapped around me, cold and familiar. In the waiting room, time stretched. A nurse called my name, led me to a curtained bed. My mother lay pale, an oxygen mask framing a face that once stared me down without blinking. Her hand reached, weak fingers finding mine. "Help me," she whispered. The sound cracked through my armor. For a heartbeat, I didn't know whether to hold on or pull away. Pity and resentment, two tides colliding, left me standing still. I remembered the way she had once told me not to make waves. Now she was drowning in her own. They postponed the judge's decision, citing the emergency. Royce's side already had their spin ready, that I'd engineered an emotional ambush. I walked out into the corridor, phone in my palm, and stared at my reflection in the window, hair askew, eyes sharp. "They think this collapse weakens me," I muttered. "They're wrong." I opened a draft, started writing a public statement demanding transparency. My thumb hovered over send, but I saved it instead. Not yet. Not here. In my mind, I mapped the next steps. Leaks to a trusted reporter, meetings with Rory and Corinne, airtight evidence. The corridor hummed with hospital machines. I turned back to the ward and watched my mother breathing under the mask. She looked small, a stranger. My jaw tightened. This wasn't a reprieve for them. This was my steel test. A text arrived from Rory, flashing on the screen. "You need to see this now, at the bank." My pulse kicked again. Whatever waited behind that vault door wasn't just paper anymore. It was the truth they feared most. The bank's vault had a door open no one expected. I drove through Geneva's quiet streets under a pale morning light, the key Lorelei gave me burning in my pocket. The Swiss bank branch loomed ahead, glass doors, security cameras, silence. Inside, a bank representative greeted me, suit perfect, tone cool. He asked for credentials. I handed over what I needed, a forged ID, access code, and that little brass key. His eyes flickered, but he didn't refuse. He led me down a corridor, swiping badges, opening vault doors. We entered a steel chamber lined with archive boxes. I saw ledgers, statements, folders stacked methodically. At the back, one sealed envelope bore my name. I held my breath. They left exactly what I needed. I pushed the envelope open. Inside lay my mother's confession. Handwritten, she admitted altering the trust, listing dates, sums, and how she had directed transfers. Beneath it, blueprints of funds, internal bank memos, annotation links. My hands shook as I photographed every page, encrypting backups, sending parts to secure storage. The vault's cold walls echoed each shutter click. I whispered, "They built walls, so I must shatter them." A vindication washed over me. The truth was there, raw and undeniable. Back in Geneva's courthouse later that day, I carried the confession, vault materials, and encryption keys. I walked into the courtroom like someone reborn. Royce's team looked unsettled, whispers across aisles. When I stood, I presented the handwritten confession and vault files. Royce objected fiercely, claimed evidence was fabricated, broken chain of custody. The judge leaned forward, asking for verification. I played my hand. Notarized timestamps, secure bank log exports, encryption metadata. The courtroom gasped. The judge nodded, eyes scanning documents. Then came the ruling. The confession and vault evidence were admissible. The forged amendment was invalidated. Partial ownership rights restored to me. Royce's face drained. I felt a silent triumph settling deep, but I wasn't done. The judge imposed temporary injunctions, no liquidation until audits complete. I stepped outside into sunlight, holding my mother's confession like a shield. I listened as the courtroom TV flashed a breaking news headline. Scandal at the Swiss bank. Embezzlement under investigation. My heart raced. I realized I hadn't just won a verdict. I had opened Pandora's box. The house felt different, quieter, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. I moved through the front hall slowly, brushing my fingertips along the curve of the stair railing, the edge of the console table. Everything was exactly where it had always been, and yet everything had changed. I stopped in front of the portrait of my father. His eyes in the painting followed me like they always had. That look, half disapproval, half distance, had become a sort of anchor in my life. I traced the outline of his face in the air. I wondered what he would say if he knew what it took to get here, what it cost. The verdict hadn't given me peace, not exactly, but it gave me a place to start over. And as I stood there, staring at the man who kept so many secrets, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. Just tired but clear. Freedom isn't gifted. It's clawed from silence, piece by piece. I made my way into the sealed vault room one last time. The estate manager had unlocked it earlier that morning, and everything sat untouched. Neat stacks, numbered drawers, valuables weighed and itemized. I didn't need them. I knew what I came for. The pen. It sat in a black velvet box, hidden beneath legal folders. Silver, heavy. His initials etched into the barrel, subtle, precise. He carried it for decades, signing papers that built an empire and buried truths at the same time. I took the pen. I left everything else. The trust funds, the shares, the deed to the vineyard. I transferred most of it back to the family accounts, mostly to Sela's kids. They didn't ask to be born into this mess, and I didn't need any of it to make my point. Reclaiming the truth was the only thing I had come for. Walking through the upstairs hallway, I passed a series of rooms locked in time. My mother's piano room, the old nursery, father's study. I paused at the edge of the gallery room and set a single photo album down on the table. One last symbolic act, one chapter closed, one wound stitched. I thought I was alone until I heard footsteps behind me, Sela, and then my mother. They stood together in the doorway. My mother's face was drawn, still pale, but her eyes were steady. I didn't speak first. She looked at the pen in my hand, then up at my face. Her mouth parted slightly, as if to speak, but no sound came out. "This was always mine," I said. My voice didn't shake. Sela tensed. "You're just going to walk away with it like nothing happened?" I didn't answer her. I wasn't here to argue. I wasn't here to beg. I turned to my mother. "I don't need your apology. I don't even need your permission." I stepped forward and placed the pen on the table between us. "But you need to understand something. This pen didn't make his words true. It only proved they existed." No one said a word. And that silence, that raw, naked silence, was the first honest moment we'd had in years. I turned and walked out without looking back. The sky outside was clear. I stepped into the garden, past the hedges and the rose trellis until I reached the sapling. Father planted the year I was born. I crouched beside it, brushed away the topsoil, and pressed the pen gently into the ground. "In soil, in memory," I whispered, "your truth grows." Beside me sat the handkerchief from chapter 1. Hand-stitched, a quiet thread from the beginning to now. I folded it, tucked it into my coat pocket, and stood. The house behind me would stand. But I was done living in it. I took one breath, then another. Justice was never about revenge. It was about identity. My life beyond this house? That's the real work now.